Hi, friends. Hello, the world. Welcome to this episode of Tools for Transitioning Humanitarians. I'm your host, Asala Monova. And today, the topic that I want to talk about is its complicated story. I feel like every one of us, maybe I'm wrong, but I have yet to meet a person who does not have a complicated story in the past or currently ongoing. And oftentimes we feel like when it's like complicated stories happen, we feel like it's so complicated that I can't do anything about it. We feel so confused, we feel stuck, and we don't really know what to do about it and how to uncomplicate it. And thing that makes it even more complicated is we keep telling everyone or ourselves that it's complicated. So therefore, let us create a tool for ourselves so we finally understand in how to uncomplicate our complicated story. And in this case, I will use my case study of my own experience of my complicated story so that you can visualize and understand it. And I will then give you tools or ways for you to think about how to untangle it or uncomplicate it. And the definition of complicated that I want to use here, and obviously you need to do your own definition of what is it complicated for you. The way that I have experienced my complicated stories is that it's so untangled with one another. It's so codependent. One story is dependent on the other story, and then it becomes so complicated. Excuse me, that my brain then feels like, well, I can't really do anything about it, right? So we'll be talking about how these complicated stories are created, why they're created, and what to do about them. So let me give you my story of complicated story that so you can visualize what I mean when I say it's complicated, right? So when I was finishing graduating from university in Germany, I met this guy who sounded like such a great guy, and we started dating. And then quickly I realized that he was married and he had his wife and child back home. He was not German, he back home in North America, and he was on work there. So we started dating, and I told him that I don't want to date anyone who is married. It's against my morals, my principles, and all of this. But I still continued dating him, and then I was afraid, I guess, at the time that if I didn't date, and then I wouldn't have another such opportunity. So I was saying one thing, but at the same time keep doing something else. And then this story went on and on for a long time, for 6 years to be exact. But in the meantime, while dating that guy, I came to Kyrgyzstan, I started working, and then I had a experience with in a toxic environment where I was having an issue, a big issue with one of my bosses. And after all the things that, and I have talked about this in one of the episodes, so you can also listen to what that details of that story with my boss. And in that situation, I felt so much powerless, so much like I really wanted to quit. I felt victim of all of the situation. I really hated that person. And at some point, I decided to resign from that position and then just leave, just escape, just go somewhere. And then the only person that I knew that I could go to is my boyfriend back in the day. And back then, he moved to Sweden. And then I went to Sweden to stay with him and to maybe start something different in my life because I didn't want to be back doing the work because of that other person, because of that boss, right? So I resigned and I went to Sweden to live with the boyfriend at the time. and only quickly to realize that I didn't have any money. He didn't want to support me in the way that I thought I should be supported. Even though he was he had a great job, but he was constantly complaining about how money is scarce, or he needs to send money to his wife and child, and he needs to support his own things. And I was like feeling basically a burden, and I didn't have a visa permit to live there, and to work. So therefore, I just felt like I was stuck. And I would actually tell everyone that in my circle that my story is so complicated and everything's so complicated. And on top of that, I had surgery coming up that I needed to do, and I had absolutely zero money for that. So money for living, money for my surgery, and relationship was going to hell because of fights over how I was totally dependent on someone else. And then I just had no means, basically. Right. So this is my complicated story that I want to illustrate. And the reason why I'm telling these elements is I really want us to start looking at what are the main reasons why I came to this complicated story, how I created that complicated story, even though maybe for many of us it's difficult to own it or to recognize or to even say that this was created by me. Definitely, there were other people who were creating with me, right? But since I can't do anything about their behavior, I'm going to look only at my own behavior of how I have created it. So let's dive into the story of how my story at the time of complicated story was created, right? So main reasons when I looked at them, and I was like reflecting on it so much yesterday, the day before, really looking at what were my main reasons for being even in that situation, right? So in the boyfriend side, I was afraid to lose him in the beginning, right? So that's how it started. I was afraid to lose him to, I was afraid maybe I will find a guy like that. So, in the reason why I was afraid is because I didn't believe that I could meet another guy who was single, who was actually available, who actually wanted to do things with me the way that I thought I would do, instead of dragging myself for 6 years being in the relationship that actually didn't really result in anything that I really wanted, right? So, therefore, the main thing that if I keep digging and digging and is as to why I was afraid that why I was afraid to lose him, because I didn't believe I would meet someone like him. Then I asked myself even further question: why was I afraid, or why didn't I believe that I could meet someone else like him that is single, that is available? Is because essentially I didn't really feel like I deserved someone like this. And of course, deserving and not deserving coming from my childhood and from how I didn't have any confidence in myself, how the way I view myself was I wasn't good enough, I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't beautiful enough, all of those things, right? So it all comes down to that deserving feeling that I never, like, I didn't feel like I was deserving. So that was the main reason why I kept in a relationship with a married man that I actually didn't see the future of, but I kept lying to myself, or I kept hoping that he will magically change his life one day, even though I was telling him, don't divorce your wife because of me, right? It's just contradiction in terms. But at the same time, keep continuing dating him, right? That was like the main reason why my complicated story was created. The other reason why my complicated story was created at workplace with my boss is that I was afraid to lose my job, and I was afraid to say anything to that boss. I was afraid to stand up for myself. I was afraid to have normal conversations with that person. I was afraid to solve it in the way that wouldn't involve me resigning. Maybe I could go to another duty station, whatever it is. But I was so afraid of all of this that I just needed to get a temporary relief. And therefore, I created this complicated story of not really resolving the issue, but rather wanting to escape, right? The main reasons for keeping my complicated story, the work situation, I kept it, I think, for over like close to 2 years, maybe. While the personal complicated story that all got tangled together in the end, I kept it for 6 years, as I said. So the reason for keeping all of that complicated story is that I really felt dependent on other people's actions or not actions, inactions. Right. So the way that I felt dependent is I felt if he divorced and then we started something together, then maybe things will work out. Even though I didn't really see how I could be working in Sweden or in Europe at the time. I just felt like at the time that that would be the solution, right? So I kept going back to the solution that wasn't actually a solution because even if, let's say, he did divorce and we started um, uh, something formal or even not formal, right? Something together, I still needed to take care of myself financially, emotionally, right? But because I saw at the time the only solution is him divorcing, and that I kept waiting for that. I kept like I made myself dependent on his action at the time, right, of divorcing, and therefore I just kept escaping all my other desires of actually living my life in that time. Interestingly, and the same goes for I don't know if I wrote in more. Yeah. The same goes for my situation with that boss that added to the complication is I kept telling myself I can't do anything about um, her or him. I can't really do anything to change. They need to change and they're not going to change or they're not changing. I can't change or I can't do anything about it. So I just kept being in this loop of it's complicated, right? This was my main um, running headline of my life at the time. My main headline of that life was it's complicated. My life is complicated. Everything's complicated. My boss hates me. I hate that boss. Um, the person's situation is going down the drain. All of these things that made me feel stuck, right? I was in Sweden without a job, without money, needing a surgery, and um, having no prospects, and keep battling within myself. Like it used to be like a battle, as if I'm like fighting myself out, right? Keep battling myself about the solution is if my boss changes. Solution is if he divorces, like, or solution is if I have a whatever job and then everything will be fine. But I knew deep down that wouldn't be a solution, right? Deep down, if we really like listen carefully, we know that the other person will not change. The other person, for them to change, they actively need to work on themselves to change. And I think I also deeply knew that my boyfriend at the time wouldn't divorce his wife, and it was all an illusion, especially after, let's say, even 3 years, right? Like, okay, 1 year, let's say, couldn't happen because of da da da. 2 years, maybe three. I mean, I should have known by third year, but because I was just so stuck and keep battling within myself that if I leave, he will not be handling it. He will be suffering, and I don't want him to suffer. At the same time, I'm suffering myself the whole time, right? And never taking any committed action. So never really taking committed action of, okay, how do I want to solve it? What do I want to actually do? I never really like got interested in that. I never really checked with myself, right? So therefore, I kept like in this jumble of complication and not really believing that I can solve it, to the point that I made things even more complicated in the way that I was fighting so much with him at the time. I was um, I was fighting in the way that I think he was telling me that I'm depressed, right? And he was even telling me that the reason why I'm depressed is you, right? So all of this codependency that you can see, that just made things even more complicated. So when I operate from the belief of it's complicated and I can't do anything about it, I actually complicated even more. That was my experience. And also check with yourself when you're telling yourself your story that it's so complicated and I can't do anything, what is the outcome of it? How do you experience your life from that perspective? And the reason why we complicate things, we continue carrying that complicated story, and there's no way I am blaming you or I'm suggesting to blame yourself. Please don't do that. There is no use for it. But owning it and genuinely understanding for how we might have created it or we might have been part of co-creating it and what can we do is a powerful place to start, because we need to understand why we keep doing this, right? Why we keep complicating things or carrying our complicated stories. And I really want you to start looking at why you do that. Here are the reasons why I have done it, is because I believed others more than I believed myself. That's why I made myself dependent on other people's actions, on their behaviors. I made myself dependent on their emotional state. If they were feeling good, I felt good. If they felt bad, I felt bad, because I just made myself dependent on how they show up in life. And that led me to just keep waiting, to keep suffering, to keep resenting, to keep escaping, and never actually do anything about it. And for 6 years, as you can see. So that is one way, one reason. And the other reason is believing that the solution is others. And that's like crazy for me to think about it now, but back in the day, I genuinely believed that all of my problems would be solved with money, right? At the time when I was searching desperately for money, that's what I thought. If I had all the, like, if I had just little money, if I just worked somewhere, maybe even McDonald's at the time, this is how I used to think, I would be solving my problem. But I knew that wouldn't solve the problem. The relationship problem wouldn't be solved by me working in McDonald's. My intellectual curiosity of growing and wanting to do things and creating impact, that wouldn't be solved by just any money, right? That would be only solved by an appropriate uh, job that I really want to do for my brain to continue growing and creating the impact. So you can see that I not only that I saw them as solution, I saw like temporary things as solutions instead of really believing, wait a minute, why am I not believing myself that I can do something? Why am I always waiting for the others to do something so I can then feel good or feel happy? Right? Therefore, I also realized that I was making other people so much more powerful than they should be in my head, in my feeling, inner world, right? I was making them more powerful by saying if they just divorce, if just he divorced, then I will be fine. Or unless he divorces, I'm powerless. Or if the boss changes, then I will be fine. If the boss doesn't hate me, then I will be fine. And making my emotional state dependent on them, and therefore allowing them to dictate how I feel, how I show up, how I make decisions, allowing them to do that, therefore making them more powerful and making myself powerless, right? And I just keep complicating things because of this feeling that I depend on them. This is like the belief and the feeling that tells, excuse me, I'm not really autonomous, independent person. I can't really solve the problems on my own. I can only solve if XYZ they do. And that's how I kept battling and carrying my complicated story for so long until it became unbearable that I was hospitalized. So, this is the thing, is that if we don't do anything about our complicated stories, it will eventually have consequences of, like in my case, being hospitalized, burnout, depression, name it, like stomach problems and many other problems, to a point that I just like couldn't bear it anymore. I I think it was one of those moments where you just explode. In my case, I imploded, right? Because I wasn't really an expressive or exploding type of person. I just imploded and I was hospitalized. And if we don't want to get to that place, then we need to do something about it. So here is what I did at the time was like, now I'm giving you more reflected version of my story. Back in the day, I didn't have that much reflected version of my story, but I knew I always was someone who wrote. So I wrote down my reasons why I'm in this situation. Right? I wrote down my reasons for what am I afraid of, and how do I feel about my situation, all of those things. And then I would always go for what would one thing change everything? Like if I did one thing, what would that be that would change everything? But change everything not in the way that's just like temporary or escaping to something else and relief, but rather change something that you can feel the difference in your life, right? That's what I'm really advocating for you to explore. And we will also see later what requires of you to do that. But this is a great start for you to start contemplating, allowing yourself the possibility to say, what if you could do something about it? And if it would be possible, if you could do something, what would be one thing you could do? So in my case, I decided first to get a job, but not just any job, get a job that really grew me. And the only job that I knew at the time that I really loved was a humanitarian work. So I returned to humanitarian work in another jurisdiction and I started like getting myself at least calming my nervous system down, getting myself sorted, and at least not be thinking about surviving like financially or fearing to be on the streets because I also had my family to take care of, right? So that's the first thing I did. I got a job. I returned to humanitarian work because that's what I love doing. And I started in another duty station and I started putting like one thing at a time in order in my life, right? My relationship at the time was continuing, but it was to a point that it was just almost over, but I just didn't own it somehow. I didn't want to believe that it was ending, even though deep down I knew it was ending, right? But I focused on the first survival things first. So I got a job and I started paying my bills. I had lots of debts by then. I started paying them. And then I started saving money for the surgery that I needed to do. And then as soon as I started saving, I started realizing that I can save for surgery. And I was even like getting debts for my surgery, but that's another story. And in that moment, I could see my brain wanting to complicate things even further by saying, oh, maybe now I should get back to, or maybe now I should invite my boyfriend to be with me. Maybe things will change now that I'm earning. Maybe he will not be depressed. Maybe he will, I could see myself do that. And that's when I decided to look at my, what do I really want section. So I guess at that time I realized I didn't want to wait anymore. I didn't want to be the person who always keeps waiting for her life to come in order somehow. I wanted to be the person who gets her own life in order. And I started asking myself very honest, deep questions of what do I actually want? Do I want to have this relationship that's not working, that had never worked, that I kept lying to myself that it is, and I kept fearing that I will lose him and all of this. But I knew there was no future of that relationship, right? So I started asking myself, like, why couldn't I have what I wanted at the time? Because I wanted a relationship that was healthy in the sense of the other person wanting what I want. They are available, single, emotionally available, all the ways, and building something together. That's what I wanted, right? And this person was not there, would probably not be there for a long time. And no judgment, that's his life. And I just wanted to get my life in order. So I realized I had a choice at that point. And the choice was like this. Either I continue feeling powerless, I continue feeling stuck, I continue feeling dependent, victimy, right? I continue waiting, delaying what I want, delaying my life, feeling confused and doubting, or I decide to believe. I decide to believe that whatever I want, I can make it happen. I don't know how. I don't need to know how, but I can start making the first step. And my first step at the time was after having the job was getting my surgery and getting through that surgery successfully. And then once the surgery was done, then getting all other parts of my life in order. And I felt like I had no choice but believe that I can put my life in order. And then I started slowly learning how to trust myself. I started feeling like a bit powerful because I could do things. I could like get a job, get my surgery done on my own with my money, and start solving one thing at a time. And I started feeling independent. And then like financially independent, and then later emotionally independent, right? And then I started living my life. And I started feeling more clearer of what I want and how I want things and feeling certain. And at a certain point, I started becoming decisive, decisive of what I want, how I want it, and how do I want to really build my life and create my life. And therefore, my final advocacy point is that when you're searching for solutions, when you are in complicated story that you're having currently, when you search for solution from this belief of at least believing that you can do something about it, believing that you're capable of solving it, and not just escaping it, right? That's key. That's the key difference. Not just escaping to something else to complicate things even further, not just make yourself dependent on someone else or makes yourself dependent on how others should change. And if they change, then you change and all of these things, because those are a bit illusionary ideas that don't work. So therefore, whatever the situation is currently, whoever you have people around that you believe um, should change, then you will change kind of thing, or you will feel better, whatever. Put them or keep them as they are, and then decide what can you actually do? Do you want to do something while they are there the way they are? If not, do you want to do it on your own? How do you want to do this? Right? So if you start allowing your brain, because your brain is a powerful uh, tool, if you want to use it that way, right? Powerful asset that can help you uncomplicate things, that can help you solve things with a long-term perspective. You're capable of doing it. Even though at moments we feel like it's not possible or we feel like we're too stuck, too confused, but allow your brain to entertain at least the idea of what if you could solve it? What if you are capable of uncomplicating things? If it was possible, what could you do one thing at a time? And then do these things out of feeling trust, out of feeling independent, like feeling powerful, independent. These are feelings that are available to you. Your brain is capable of generating them. And the way you generate them is direct your brain to feeling what would be feeling powerful feel like in my body? How would I feel independent if I really believe that I am? If I really believe that I'm an autonomous, independent human being, how would I feel it? And then start making those solutions, whatever that solution is, because here is the key that I have detected is that if we make solutions out of feeling dependent, out of fear, out of feeling like this is the only thing we can do, then we will always end up finding only temporary solutions or finding solutions that actually are not solutions. They're just escaping mechanisms. They're just escaping routes for us to feel a relief. And then once we feel a relief, we realize that we're actually not there where we want to anyway, right? So therefore, if that relief helps you, great to do that. But once you have that relief, you still go back and ask this question of, I am capable of uncomplicating this situation. How would I do that? Even if it doesn't depend on me, if I feel like so many other people involved. Yes, even if like leave them on their own, leave them as they are. How do you want to solve it for yourself? How do you want to solve it for yourself in the way that gives you that inner peace, inner freedom? And it is your life, right? And the more we spend feeling confused and feeling stuck and feeling it's complicated and feeling dependent, the more we don't live our lives. We just keep being dependent on the other person, how they think, how they feel. Are they happy with us? Are they not happy with us? We just keep being in that space that just robs every joy out of our system. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I have done this for like most of my life. And I really don't want anyone to be going through that. And it doesn't mean that we don't depend in the sense of creating relationships. Beautiful, let's do that. But choose your dependency because you really want to, you love and you want to be in that relationship. And it gives you maybe a sense of united or commitment or whatever it is, do that for those reasons, but not for the reason of they will save you or you need to save them or they are solutions of all your problems or you are solution of all their problems, because that never leads to anywhere. So my dears, if you want to work on this, I would love to coach you. I would love to coach you to get to the place where you really are solving all of the complicated, not complicated problems, stories from this place of believing in yourself, believing that you can do this, believing that your dreams are valid and you can actually make them happen, and start solving for them and start living the life that you want instead of just keep delaying it or waiting for it. Absolutely, come coach with me. Until then, have a beautiful weekend. Thank you. Bye.